Welcome, everyone, to the Information's TITV. My name is Akash Pasricha. It is Thursday, December 4th. We have got a great lineup for you today. First up, we are diving deep into new reporting on web publishers' newfound confusion around whether or not heightened traffic on their websites is coming from bots or from humans. We'll then turn to some earnings news, including a conversation with the new CEO of C3 AI as the company faces falling revenue and a stock that has taken a steep hit this year. We'll also check in with our AI reporter who is tracking OpenAI's efforts to counter Google's new Gemini 3 model with its own in-development system codenamed Garlic. I don't know why it's called Garlic. That's going to be the first question we ask her. And last but not least, we will wrap up with a robotics roundup, breaking down the biggest headlines and news and what they mean for the sector's rapid growth. It's going to be a big show, so let's get right on into things. Chatbots are wreaking havoc for companies operating websites because the companies behind those sites can't figure out whether or not this new traffic they're seeing is in some cases coming from real people or from bots. Joining me now to discuss this is Catherine Perloff. Catherine, welcome to the show. It's great to see you.
Hi.
So what's going on here? How did you even come across this issue of there being heightened traffic and people not knowing where it's coming from?
Yeah, well, it actually started, and we'll get into this because I was talking to a publisher who was saying that they were having trouble blocking Grok because they couldn't tell, Grok being the XAI chatbot, because they couldn't tell whether it was a bot or not, and that made it hard to block. And then when I dug more into the issue, I saw that this is a pretty widespread problem. Scraping has been going on for a while, crawlers, bots to websites. But it's taken on sort of a new significance for websites in the age of AI when they feel, that the AI companies are taking their content without paying for it or, replacing the visitors that advertisers are paying them to reach. So blocking bots has become a bigger priority for websites as these AI chatbots become more popular and the sort of threat they pose to websites, especially web publishers, but in some cases retailers, has become more important. But the actual blocking of the bots is sort of a challenge.
So the end goal is to block the bots, but to do that, we have to figure out if it's a human or a bot in the first place. Why is it so hard to detect which is which?
Yeah, and one caveat is, not all websites want to block all bots, especially with the rise of agents. You essentially, if you're an e-commerce site, you might want the agent to come to your site and let people make a purchase. But yeah, it's so hard because, a lot of this kind of depends on what the company sending the bot says and how they present their bot. OpenAI, for example, people told me was pretty good about being pretty transparent about their bots and, telling websites, hey, I'm coming to your site to scrape. I'm coming to your site because a user asked a question in search. I'm coming to your site with my agent. They're pretty transparent, but not all AI companies are. I think the whole agentic issue makes it complicated because, if it's a human asking an AI to do something, does that make it a human or a bot? Is it a human visitor or a bot visitor? But yeah, I think also a lot of AI companies also know that websites don't want them there. So if they look more like a human visitor, then they will not be detected, they won't be blocked, and then they can get the content they want, which can inform their models.
So who are the companies now that are making this an opportunity for them? You outlined a couple of the startups and a couple of the bigger tech companies. Is this a big business now, helping websites figure this out?
Yeah, it's interesting. I kind of focus on two companies in my story, though there's many companies that work on this. One is Datadome, which is kind of a specialist just in the blocking of bots. One is Cloudflare, which is a company more known as a CDN, or so it helps websites sort of just kind of connect with servers and deliver the content. But it also offers this bot blocking software. I actually also highlighted this company, Dark Visitors, which was started by a Meta engineer, and then he quit 6 months ago to sort of work on this full time. And it's sort of more analytics for finding out what all the bots are.
Who's the best company? Who do people turn to most?
Some publishers kind of did flag Datadome. Datadome and another company, Human, was flagged in a Forrester report as like the leader in this bot management category because they're more specialist. But other publishers like Cloudflare too, and Cloudflare's kind of been very public about this. They made an announcement over the summer that like they were going to help publishers block the bots. Is it a big opportunity? You also asked, like, I think for publishers, they've said that this is like a kind of like a thing that maybe their IT guys used to only think about, like, and it wasn't that big a deal. But now, like, the salespeople are like thinking about it. Now it's like a commercial issue. And, one publisher told me this is even more important than like our ad tech vendors, these vendors, which is kind of a big thing because ads are how a lot of publishers make money. So it is increasingly important, but is it a big business? These companies are growing, and they've talked about, the companies I talked to, they said they've been getting business from there. But I mean, the AI is an existential threat to their customers. So it's sort of like you have customers who are using you, but can they survive long enough to become paying customers is kind of a question I had. So
let me ask you a slightly different question, which is that one of the fundamental issues is the idea of, will websites get these crawlers, these companies operating these bots, will they get them to pay for the content in the long run? That's the hope, at least. Does this reporting that you've done, does it help us answer that question at all? Or is it really just highlighting how difficult it's going to be to get those companies to pay for the data at all?
I think part of the effort to do this blocking was to be able to quantify how much the AI companies needed the content for publishers. So if I could, go to OpenAI, if I'm a publisher that doesn't have a deal with OpenAI, or even if I am a publisher that has a deal with OpenAI, but I want to renegotiate it, because a lot of these deals, I reported this a couple months ago, they weren't really the existing deals between AI companies and publishers weren't really based on a whole lot of math and a whole lot of like real like business considerations, because no one really knew what this economy would look like. So they're kind of just flat numbers they could come up with. So the goal with a lot of this blocking is, okay, if we can quantify how much the AI companies need us by showing how often their bots come to our sites, we can start using that as a term in deals and, saying
we actually have the number then. We have leverage. We have leverage.
Yeah. And there's been kind of models suggested like by Cloudflare, like pay per crawl or by like pay per query. So I think that the problem is if publishers can't quantify it, it makes it hard to negotiate. Now, I talk about Grok, like I don't think we know of Grok having any deal with publishers. And so maybe, OpenAI is being maybe among the best sort of corporate citizens in this whole endeavor. And they're also the ones doing the licensing deal. So maybe the companies that like aren't showing up, you weren't going to get a deal with anyway, because they weren't going to be willing.
Right.
But yeah, I think the bigger question is like, are we going to get to a world where there are standards and that's just like, the kind of the way business is done, and then all AI companies to be legitimate are going to have to show up and say, hey, I'm a bot, and let publishers know and give permission, or it's also very likely that it'll just become a free for all and publishers won't be able to control it. So
great. Well, Catherine, I want to thank you for coming on. It's a great conversation as always, and look forward to talking with you again soon.
Okay, great. Thanks, Akash.
C3 AI reported quarterly results last night. The company's revenue shrank about 20% compared to a year ago. It was the second straight quarter of contraction. This time last year, the company's top line was growing nearly 30%. It all sets the stage for the company's new CEO, Steven Ehikian, who just took that position in September. And I want to bring him on to help us understand how he is going to re-energize the company. Steven, welcome to TITV. It's great to have you here.
Thank you, Akash. Nice to be here.
So I want to segment this discussion into two parts. I want to talk about the problems that you've identified as you've studied the company over the course of the last 90 days. And then I want to turn to talking about the solutions that you plan to implement. Last night on the call, you were asked about why growth or why contraction had really persisted for these two straight quarters compared to this time last year. And you mentioned sales execution as one of the fundamental reasons. Unpack that for a little bit. What did you mean by sales execution?
Yeah. So when you have a business that's led by Tom Siebel, who's the CEO of this company, and he had health issues earlier this year that he disclosed. That is a hard knock against any organization when you take a leader like that and sidelined. He was the heart and soul of this company. So when he was sidelined, it really did slow down the execution across sales. What does that actually mean? Our business is about landing what we call initial production deployments, IPDs. These are initial use cases with customers. These are high value use cases across core operations. When we deliver real economic value, those convert and grow. Unfortunately, in Q1, we didn't have the strong leadership to drive accountability to actually ensure the execution of those IPDs. So I would say that was the number one reason for the miss on that.
Okay, and I just want to get a little more granular here. For those of us who haven't been on sales teams and don't really understand, what it's like when something like that happens in an organization. I mean, is this direction on how to position the product that the teams weren't getting? Was it issues around pricing? Was it sort of just help us understand really, on the ground what that looked like?
So enterprise sales is not a quick turnkey solution when you have a little widget and you just do high volume. This is a highly relationship-based execution where you have a complex use case and you really have to drive the execution with our internal teams and our customers. These are use cases from like supply chain optimization to asset performance to demand forecasting. I highlight the execution is so critical here because when we close an account, we have an alignment with the customer of the value we want to deliver. If we can't deliver that in a timely basis, those companies don't convert. And that requires the full scale and effort of our company to go help deliver that. So when you lose your leader, your CEO, and he's sidelined, you lose a lot. It's kind of like a rudderless organization for a while. And so for anybody who hasn't run enterprise sales before, that's a huge knock against an organization. So that's
basically not knowing which accounts to prioritize, which, what direction really you really want to take the growth, stuff like that.
It's across every dimension, every part of the organization it touches. So how do you get started? Which target accounts to target? How to drive velocity? It all starts from the top.
Right. I do want to talk about the solutions that you're planning here, but I wanted to talk about one customer segment that caught my eye. Manufacturing as a share of your business declined considerably. I wondered why that segment in particular.
What I can tell you going forward is that segment is actually the fastest growing segment right now for us. And when you think of discrete manufacturing, I look at the work we're doing to deliver the nuclear class submarine, the Columbia class. This is all about reindustrializing America, specifically the maritime industrial base. We're seeing big growth on that segment, as well as semiconductor. I kind of mentioned AMD is a customer of ours from Q2. This is again focusing on discrete, manufacturing, and that is an area of focus for us.
So, what's the plan from here now for you, Steven? How do you plan to bring this company back to growth and ultimately, hopefully, becoming one of the booming names in AI that we've heard so much about?
Yeah, so Akash, I've spent countless meetings with customers, prospects, and partners. And I'll say this, the observation is the opportunity for C3 is bigger than I could have anticipated, primarily because the enterprise AI market is growing so fast. And I think we have a truly differentiated product here where we are not just a chatbot, we are driving core operations for large manufacturing companies, energy, healthcare, and federal and state and local. So my focus is on one, execution. I'm in the weeds day to day with our sales team, driving these execution and ultimately driving economic value for our customers. If I do that, you will see the conversion. And if we focus our product, we have an amazing platform, 16 years of development, plenty of capabilities. When we focus on the right segments, I mentioned federal, state and local, energy, manufacturing, healthcare, and select others, we win. So there's two components, driving execution day to day, but also focusing our engine on the right markets and market focus.
And how do you square that then with the reality that enterprises, as you said, which are a big customer group for every enterprise software company right now, is getting them to buy AI? It's slow. I mean, these enterprises are saying, look, I got to find the right people. I got to find the budget. I got to find the ROI. How do you square that with the fact we even saw numbers this week that AI adoption in some cases for the largest companies is starting to plateau?
That's not what I'm saying. And honestly, where the focus for us on these industries, like industrial industries, again, manufacturing, healthcare, energy. They're seeing strong macro tailwinds. And the problem we're solving is eliminating a lot of the drudgery from day to day of the work on the ground. Think of this again, this is not a horizontal use case. These are very discrete applications for supply chains, for asset performance, to minimize downtime. Think of the application across the Air Force to make sure you have the maximum number of fleet in the air, to Shell to wants to make sure oil production is on schedule.
Right.
Demand forecasting, semiconductors to vaccines. These are what we're influencing. So from my perspective, and this is where we're finding partnerships with these hyperscalers and system integrators, we are able to apply this vertical technology on top of their horizontal platforms to go to market.
I want to ask you a slightly more personal question, which is you've been in the role now for 90 days. I wonder in the 90 days before you took the role, and I don't know when you knew that you were going to be CEO, presumably it was at some point in that period, but how do you prepare for coming into a turnaround role like this? Who are you talking to? Are you studying playbooks of companies that have gone through this? How did you prepare?
Well, two areas would probably help me. One, I was a customer of C3 first. So before C3, I was running the GSA, the General Service Administration, and I was in process of making the government more efficient and evaluating AI solutions to help us do so. And I saw the full swath of the market, came across C3, and I saw the demos that jumped off the page. I'm like, what is
Right.
that? And so that was my introduction. I spent a lot of time evaluating the technology as a customer. So that was my first. Second is I've built AI companies in the past. Two companies. I was fortunate enough for Salesforce to acquire us. So I understand where the technology is going and the capability.
I'm sorry. I don't mean to interrupt you. I'm asking a little more philosophical, turnarounds. They're really hard, right? And there's only been a couple of big turnarounds in history, at least in technology. I wonder, did you study any of these companies? Did you talk to any leaders who had sort of architected these playbooks?
Yes, I've spent a lot of time. One, I got to know Tom Siebel extremely well, got to know the board, so the existing strategy, and I also knew where we need to get to. I also have, from my background, mentors in the space that have done turnarounds of large enterprise companies. So I spent a lot of time with them, and they've been helpful in my previous past building enterprise companies in Silicon Valley. So yeah, study playbooks, understood it, but most importantly, every company is unique. And the alignment with the executive chairman, Tom Siebel, and the board was where I spent the most amount of time understanding their strengths, where they have to deserve the right to win, which industries, which products. And that allowed me, at least give me an informed opinion of where to focus my first 90 days.
Right. Well, Steven, thank you so much for coming on the show. We really appreciate it. And we look forward to seeing how you architect your playbook in the months to come.
Thank you, Akash. I appreciate it.
Okay. It has been a busy week of news with OpenAI, and one story that has been a little overlooked is my colleague Stephanie Palazzolo's reporting that the company is actually working on a new model that should hopefully pose a renewed challenge to Google's Gemini 3 model, which has been getting a lot of buzz. I want to bring on Stephanie to help us understand how Sam Altman is thinking about the new model. Steph, welcome back to the show. It's great to have you here.
Thanks for having me.
It's a bit of a busy week for you, isn't it? Gosh, you're in San Diego. You're at the conference. You got the code red. You got the new model. I mean,
Yes, definitely a little sleep deprived, but enjoying it all.
okay. Well, thank you so much for being here. We really appreciate it. Let's talk about the new model, which is called Garlic. Okay, and we'll get to maybe the code names later on. But what's going to be different about Garlic?
Yeah, no, definitely some interesting code names from OpenAI, but essentially what Garlic is it's a new pre-trained model that OpenAI executives have been saying performs as well as Google's Gemini 3 and Anthropic's Opus 4.5 models in areas like coding and reasoning, which of course are very important to all these companies. And I think kind of the reason why this is so interesting is because pre-training is an area that OpenAI has kind of historically struggled with. And to give some context, pre-training is basically the kind of first step of model training, where you show a model just tons and tons of data from the web, from books, from other sources to teach it to make connections between all of them. So, while OpenAI has kind of struggled in this in the past, Google has done really well on pre-training. And the reason why that's so important is because a lot of researchers believe that when you improve pre-training, you also improve a model's ability to come up with new discoveries beyond what it's been trained on. And so that's kind of the holy grail of all these AI companies. You want the models to come up with, like cures for cancer or like new ways to do AI research. And so that's kind of this holy grail that all the AI labs are working towards.
How quickly do we think this model is going to come out?
So we don't know the exact timing, but it does seem like OpenAI is moving very quickly to release its next couple models, especially given the kind of positive reaction to Google's Gemini 3. And so I think we'll definitely see some model that's based on Garlic, by early next year, in the next couple months or so. So definitely keep a lookout for that one.
I have to say, we saw, I think it was GPT-5 that had the big sort of splashy keynote and everything like that. And we obviously know the story has changed a lot since then in many ways. I almost wonder if the keynotes and the releases, everything's going to be toned down a little bit now that the model wars are so competitive, honestly. Like why make a huge deal out of 6, 7, 8, 9 when a month later, somebody else could release something and totally blow you out of the water?
Yeah, I think OpenAI has definitely learned its lesson from GPT. So I don't think we should expect to see, huge releases or GPT-6, GPT-7 anytime soon.
Right.
We'll probably go maybe 5.2, 5.3, 5.5.
Right.
So
Right.
expect more kind of like incremental updates versus a big splashy launch.
I want to talk about another topic that you wrote about this week in your column. You wrote about something called the split brain problem. I was going to say, I was trying to make sure I read it right. The split brain problem. What is that, and why is OpenAI struggling with it?
Yeah, so bear with me because it's going to get a little technical, but I will try to break it down. So this is essentially a problem that researchers at OpenAI and most likely the other labs have kind of noticed, where basically just the way that you phrase a question to a model can lead to extremely different, variations on the way that it answers. And this is basically all because of the way that models are trained. And so essentially researchers give models data to help improve the model's behavior in very specific areas like reasoning or math or science. And so for instance, like a researcher might give a model kind of formal math proofs to teach it how to better answer math questions more accurately. And then separately, maybe the researcher gives the model just more general kind of question answer pairs to teach it to respond like politely and friendly and in ways that humans like. So using lots of emojis and bullet points, for instance, to like break down a really long answer. And so in the future, whenever the model is, powering ChatGPT, for instance, it might respond differently based on which scenario it believes that it's in. This kind of first scenario where maybe it's answering very formal math proofs, or the second scenario where it's answering more general questions and where its focus is more on being friendly and the tone and the formatting of its answer. So if somebody, phrases a math question like in the style of a formal proof, maybe the model will answer correctly. But if you phrase it more like casually, the model might accidentally think it's in the scenario that it gets rewarded for like having a really friendly, nice formatted answer. And so it might give you like an incorrect answer to the math problem, but maybe it's like formatted super nicely and it has a bunch of emojis and bullet points and things like that, which is obviously not what you want.
So I mean, at its core, this is sort of it's coming back to the issue that it depends a lot what you put into the model in terms of how good a response you get out. I wonder if the granularity of this problem that you've identified, does that reflect how far the models have come, or does it, on the flip side, reflect how much still they have to improve? Where does this problem sit in that stack?
I think it's more the second. I mean, it's really interesting because, on one hand, you could argue that humans get tripped up on the way that people word questions to you. Like maybe I give you a tricky wording to a question and you might get it wrong.
Yeah.
But you kind of expect these models, which are, supposedly going to be superhuman soon. They're going to like find the cure for cancer. You would kind of expect them to not have those same issues.
Yeah, they should be able to interpret what you're saying. Like,
Yeah, exactly.
catch my drift, man. know.
But even for humans, like you can imagine like a math professor would not answer a math question incorrectly if I gave it to them in a formal math proof or something versus if I asked them very casually in a conversation. So it's just very kind of interesting, but like very weird that models are still having these somewhat, basic problems.
Right. Last question for you. You are at a conference this week, and there has been a lot of buzz about the Code Red story that you published. I wonder what the chatter is on the ground, not just about the Code Red that OpenAI has issued, but also on the ground more broadly at this event.
Yeah, so this week I'm at NeurIPS in San Diego, and it's been super fun. Loved meeting all the researchers here. There's like a million people at this conference. I think for Code Red, yeah, definitely has been coming up in some conversations. I do think that on one hand, like all the researchers talk to each other, so I think a lot of them knew, even weeks before Gemini 3 was released, that it was going to be a good model, that OpenAI was probably going to have some sort of reaction to it. So I think on one hand, it wasn't like incredibly surprising to them, but I do think like it just really highlights how intense the competition is. And just in terms of kind of like broader topics that people care about, I think one topic that's come up a lot is called continual learning. So it's basically the idea that models should continue, learning and improving themselves even after they've been trained and while they're being used out in the real world. And so hopefully we'll have more to come on that in our recap newsletter from this event.
Great. Well, look forward to reading it. Steph, thanks so much for coming on. Get some rest at some point, and we'll talk to you again very soon.
Sounds good.
Okay. Robotics is growing increasingly important to the current tech boom, especially with big companies like Tesla declaring it will be the future of its business, and also venture capitalists fighting tooth and nail for flashy robotics funding rounds. To cover it all, we are introducing a new robotics segment that will be weekly on our show with our very own Rocket Drew to help us make sense of the news as it comes at us fast. This week, even Washington was making news in robotics, and so I want to bring on Rocket for our first discussion. Rocket, welcome back to the show. It's great to have you here.
Hey, Akash. Doing good. Glad to be here.
The first of many weekly robotics segments. I'm excited for this one. But the only promise is you have to promise to show up. You can't send a robot in your place. It has to be you. Okay. All right. That's the deal. We gave you the segment. We gave you the segment. So, look, let's start with this headline that Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick has reportedly been meeting with robotics industry CEOs. What do we know about the nature of these conversations?
Yeah, well, in some ways, this is a long time in the making. So over the spring, a bunch of robotics companies went to the Hill and they met with Congress people and they showed off their robots and they had a demo day. And, if you were a congressperson around that day, you could have gone outside and seen a Tesla Optimus robot do some tricks for you. So the robotics industry has been pushing for a little while to have a presence in the policy world and to have some of their policies passed. It seems like what we're hearing now is the culmination of those efforts. So they've gotten through to some people in the administration, and maybe we're going to see some responses to those asks soon, in particular from the Commerce Department. I believe the Politico report also said we could see an executive order on robot policy soon.
Okay. And what sorts of asks have the robotics industry been making?
Money. That's
okay.
A key one. Yeah. I think one of the big asks is always, can we get some funding? Can we get some investment in R&D, both for robotics companies to develop their technology and also potentially funding for their customers? It could come in the form of a tax break. It could be direct funding, but funding to sort of help the customers be a little emboldened and feel confident to adopt robots. A lot of the time it feels like kind of cutting edge technology. They're uncertain about it. It seems like it comes with some risks. So a little bit of funding could go a long way to help them feel more confident in taking those first steps in adopting robots. So funding is a big piece of the puzzle. There could also be a lot of worker training. I think that's a key ask that comes up repeatedly.
Right.
And this also sort of helps respond to potential concerns about robots taking jobs, right? Roboticists also see new jobs being created, and they see jobs that involve working with and creating and maintaining robots playing an increasingly important role in the future. So a key policy ask is often worker training programs, getting into the schools, helping people understand how to work with robots.
And it hits on a good point, because when I think of what DC's involvement in the robotics sector might look like, sure, funding, tax breaks, this is all part of it. But I actually think some of the policy questions around robotics, similar to the policy questions we're seeing around AI, those are actually the more interesting questions to me, because, look, we're talking about labor displacement in ways that we may not have seen for decades.
Yeah, absolutely. The comparison with AI is really interesting. I mean, the administration is so interested in AI policy. You saw Trump's AI action plan. And I think the robotics industry recognizes that this is an opportunity for them to kind of piggyback on that interest in AI policy because robots are physical AI, right? It's the expression of that AI in the physical world. On the other hand, the shape of the policy debate for robotics kind of looks very different from the policy issues we're hearing about in AI. I mean, some of the big issues in AI policy are around what kind of information the leading AI companies have to disclose to the public or to officials, and how do we prevent AI systems from engaging in kind of algorithmic bias and discrimination? That's very different from the kind of industrial policy we're seeing on the robotics side, where we want to just sort of reshore American manufacturing. One thing that's similar is they both have this dynamic of competition with China, though. The administration sort of sees both sectors as important to competing against China, both economically and potentially militarily.
I mean, they want to get out ahead of it. Really, certainly with any of these races, they don't want to lose. The other thing that I was thinking about, which I don't know how significant it is, but look, manufacturing these robots in the long run is going to be something they have to think about, and the parts have to come from somewhere. And if the tariffs are going to affect the parts, then that's going to be an issue. We're not talking about mass producing these robots yet, but at some point that's going to be an issue, I'm sure.
That's a great point. One person put it to me, a robotics person who's involved in this kind of policy work, said their experience with the administration has been a little Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. And what they meant by that was, on the one hand, the conditions seem great to have some kind of industrial policy for robotics. There's this competition with China. There's this interest in AI. There's a sense that we want to reshore American manufacturing. And in fact, because of the administration's position on immigration, there's more need for robotic automation than ever because it's hard to get labor in a lot of these facilities and warehouses and factories. So in some sense, those should be the perfect conditions. The flip side is the tariffs, like you said. I mean, the administration sees the tariffs as kind of stimulating that industrial policy and reshoring, but the tariffs also apply to the components that go into the robots.
Right.
And a lot of roboticists are frustrated by that. It means their costs are going through the roof. It's more expensive than ever for them to actually make these robots. Maybe in the long term, they could also bring, in the US, they could have some kind of manufacturing for the parts. But right now, the supply chain is very distributed, and a lot of it lives in China or otherwise in East Asia. And we're talking really sophisticated parts, like little motors that are tuned to be just right to work in a robot. And it's going to take a long time to bring that kind of manufacturing back to the US.
I want to talk about a column you wrote this morning in our AI Agenda newsletter. You debriefed some of the comments that Dario Amodei, the CEO of Anthropic, made yesterday at the New York Times DealBook Summit. And it was kind of interesting. He very much called out OpenAI. He didn't say their name, but he sort of called out their YOLO strategy, he called it, and contrasted it with his more focused enterprise strategy in some ways. What did you make of the comments?
I think it was a very interesting conversation. It was very timely following our report that OpenAI has initiated this code red. He's definitely talking his book. So he's saying that while Google and OpenAI are scrapping it out, one-upping each other with every new release in the consumer market, kind of vying for the loyalty of consumers who use the chatbot, Anthropic is playing in a league of its own. It's just focusing on the enterprise market, and that means it can focus on capabilities that matter to businesses, like science and coding in particular.
I did think that the one point he made that was it really hit home the tension in the AI sector right now is with respect to these circular financing deals. There is sort of the situation being stuck between a rock and a hard place, which is that you either invest too much in these data centers and compute, and you worry that your revenue will not catch up to the investments that you made, or you don't invest enough and then you fall behind because you can't actually cater to all the demand. And look, I think that is the tension right now in the AI sector that everybody is dealing with. I do think in some ways Anthropic is playing this game a little more conservatively compared to others in the sector.
Yeah, I could see that as well. There's also a sense that maybe you'd rather go overboard in terms of, amassing compute resources, because maybe you'll be able to find a use for it in the future. And that's like the better side of the equation than falling short and not having enough compute. But yeah, like you say, it's a tricky trade-off.
Right. Great. Well, Rocket, thanks so much for coming on the show. I'm excited to see you next week on our robotics segment once again. Have a great rest of your day, and we'll talk to you soon.
Looking forward to it. Thanks, Akash.
Well, that does it for today's show. A reminder, we are on this stream Monday through Friday at 10 a.m. Pacific, 1 p.m. Eastern. I want to thank Amazon Web Services, who is our presenting sponsor for this production. And I want to thank you for tuning in. We really do appreciate your viewership. I'm already excited for our next show tomorrow. Have a great rest of your Thursday. Bye-bye for now.